So here's the real question that I keep on thinking. You know, yesterday our president got up. He spoke, in my opinion, brilliantly. He acknowledged the complexities and the difficulties of his job. But if you look at Facebook and all the other social media, there seem to be quite binary views about how well he's actually handling the crisis. So, you know, while we're waiting for the hour, maybe put your hand up and tell me what your opinion of how he has handled the crisis. Bearing in mind that, you know, this is more Yehuda's area in terms of politics, how much power he actually has and doesn't have, and I wouldn't know the answer to that. But I'm interested to know, what do people feel? Has he handled the crisis well? We know that Lamini Zuma has done everything she can to thwart any good work he's done. That we know. But the question is whether he has done a good job given his complications and limitations. Yehuda, what's your opinion on that? You're on mute, Yehuda.
Computer guy.
He's working on a strategy. He's a long-term strategy man, and you can see ahead where he's heading, and it's fascinating. My only feeling is I hope he keeps the lid on the pot, but I think he's on the right road, and we're still going to see. I think we're still going to see huge changes in the political scene. Not only this year, but next year, definitely. The foundations are going to change, definitely. But I think he's, that's my opinion. I think the others have also their own opinions.
Thank you for that, Pet. Yehuda, what's your opinion?
I think what started out as a very good strategy has been bubbled through learning from and taking cues from anger and Kiyami.
No, there's something wrong with your audio. Can you do something about it? No, you're on mute now.
Now?
Yeah, clearer. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, it's in the computer. I think they had a clear strategy which has been buffered and reconstructed along the way by public opinion and internal forces. I still think the president is very hamstrung by internal forces within the ANC, and I don't see him having a clear strategy, honestly, going forward. Even if he did, the underlying forces that were still there prior to COVID won't permit him to implement business-friendly strategy.
Well, that's the big question then. If your opinion is that he is essentially not controlling the government, because that's essentially what you're saying, that he's essentially not controlling the government, then who is controlling the government?
If I may add, sorry.
My opinion is we have a very strong union and SACP influence, coupled with those who are trying to prevent themselves from going to jail, who are really controlling and putting the strings.
Chaim, what were you going to say?
I do concur with Yehuda. I read an article yesterday, and there seems to be a subtle movement or a coup d'etat, if you want to call it that, of the socialists and the unions, i.e. this SACP and the union fraternity. An example is that our Minister of Higher Education, with regards to the SDL levy being removed by the Minister of Finance for X amount of months, had a side meeting with the unions and the communists, and basically said that decision, it's not a tax relief and that money will have to be paid back. They basically went completely against the Minister of Finance, and they had the side meeting. It wasn't even sanctioned, and he went publicly and made these statements. And the feeling is that there is this silent approach from the far left to try and literally, slowly but surely, like bracket creep that creeps up on you silently, to take over, certain elements and policy direction within the ANC government.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but I think that everything that you and yehuda are saying, at the end of the day, the most complex part of our job as advisors, and in fact, you know what? It's just gone 10 o'clock. I think we should actually begin. So let me start, and I'm going to start by using this discussion that we've been having. Is Steve's around? Is Shady, you there? Great, fantastic. And Rochelle, you there, right? Good. So if everybody, okay, so we're going to go like this. If I could ask everybody to remain mute while we're talking, other than the panel today. So we've decided, as you probably read in the invitation, to do things a little bit differently. We as advisors often get faced with very common questions, the same questions a lot of people are asking, and those are, we decided to collate these questions and see what we can do to best answer these questions for clients with not just your advisor, but a few of the Octagon advisors. And we're going to try our best to answer all the questions that have been asked. Some of them, of course, boil down to opinion. And as I like to say, you're entitled to be wrong. I don't mind. But at the end of the day, that's my opinion. And we all got our own opinions. And I'm going to ask the participants, as in the Octagon advisors, to try and keep two things out of this debate. The first is emotion. Okay. And we have to be honest, these are emotional times. These are very, very difficult times for everybody. Okay. Just this morning, I got into the office a couple of hours ago, and I've had most of the back office individually come and speak to me about what's going on in their lives. And, times are difficult for everybody. And I'm not even talking about financially. Emotionally, times are difficult. So let's try to keep emotion out of it. And the other thing is unsubstantiated fact. So when you read a horror article, and remember at the end of the day, 90% of the articles written on News 24, et cetera, are there and designed to achieve two things: to confirm the narrative of the author. So if I'm far right in my opinion, which I'm not, but if I'm far right in my opinion, I'm going to write an article in confirmation of my opinion, and I'm going to manipulate facts to suit my opinion. So let's be careful about quoting articles that are as yet unsubstantiated. We no longer have the press as an advocate of the truth. It's an advocate of an opinion. And let's be careful about that. So let's start by putting perspective into our country and putting perspective into things. So I'm going to give you a very cool example, because it's now with the benefit of 8 years of hindsight. And so now I sound like a genius. In those days, things were different. In the year 2012, you might recall that the Greek crisis was in full swing. So in April and May 2012, and in March and April 2013 was when the Greek crisis, those 4 months was when the Greek crisis, and this is when the threat of Greece leaving the European Union, the contagion debt crisis, because Greece owed a lot of money to its European partners, and the big question was whether indeed Greece would leave or be kicked out of the European Union. And I remember at the time attending 2 consecutive Wednesday evening dinners, one with Coronation and another one with what is now known as 91 Asset Management. I have to tell you that the 2 speakers I to this day respect immeasurably for their acumen and for their intelligence. And they both made categoric statements. And the statements were, you need to understand that Greece will be out of the Union by the end of July. Conversation over. You need to get your head around that. And it was a very convincing argument. And they gave a whole host of support of what they were saying. And I have to tell you that as what I think is a reasonably intelligent person, sounded like it was a done deal. Well, guess what? Number one, Greece has not defaulted on their debt. By the way, they're paying punitive interest in excess of 25%. That means your money doubles every 4 years. They're paying punitive interest, and they have not defaulted on that debt. And as you all know, Greece is not out of the euro. Greece is very much part of the euro. And so I learned from that what is a categoric statement of fact today is likely not going to be a fact tomorrow. So that's, a word about not necessarily politics, but about understanding the space that we're operating in. Bit of housekeeping before we continue. As always, we have the chat function, which I will be monitoring actively during the process. If you take a look at the bottom of your screen, there is a little icon at the bottom there that says chat. You can either chat to me directly. You can say, page down there, you'll find Menachem Kay, or your advisor, or to everyone. We'll monitor that for questions that come up during the time, and we'll try to answer those questions. What we have done in preparation is we prepared a whole host of questions on subjects. So we've broken the subjects down into general budgeting, risk, that's your life assurance, disability insurance, and the like, short-term, medical aid, and then general economics. We have the panel today of Neil Jankelowitz, Stephen Crouse, and Yehuda Kay, and Chaim, who we will ask specific questions to. And then when it comes to the general economic questions, we're going to open it up to the panel. And I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, to please raise your physical hand so that I can see if you want to talk. I'm going to ask you to please, when you are not being addressed, to please mute yourself so that we don't have a bit of an overlay of time. I'm also going to ask you to try keep your answers concise, because we have a lot to get through and we want to try and cover as much information as possible. So my screen is orchestrated the way it is, and it just happens to be that Neil Jankelowitz is in my top left-hand corner when you put it onto gallery view. And so my first question is going to go to Neil. So maybe, Neil, if you could please take yourself off mute. Oh, so before I forget, as always, all of our sessions are recorded. They're available, one second, yehuda, they're available on our website, and they're under the news section of the website, octagonfinancial.co.za. Yehuda?
Sorry, it's a new computer. I just want to check that I've set up the you can hear me?
Okay, Neil, you're going to be the first person. So, Neil, one of the things that we've spoken about before, you and I, is, and I know that you're one of those people who's just naturally brilliant at budgeting and the management of money. And one of the things you've discussed with me in the past is to be obsessive about the building up of an emergency fund, the maintenance of an emergency fund. And tell me, from your personal perspective and your client's perspective, how have you found that focus of building an emergency fund? How obviously necessary have you found it during this period?
Thanks, Nachi. I think that's a good question, and one that's come up very, very often over these last few months. But I think it's quite crazy when you brought up the Greek crisis that it was in 2012, which is 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you think 8 years ago seems like yesterday, building up an emergency fund doesn't happen overnight, clearly. If you think 8 years ago, when the Greek crisis happened, if you started building up that emergency fund properly, when we hit a crisis like this, the chances are that you would probably have sufficient funds to see you through a few months. The problem that I find a lot of people have made is that they procrastinate about building up an emergency fund. So one bit of advice that I've always given to clients, and certainly always done for myself, is I've built into my budget a premium that goes off every month that goes into an emergency fund. There's lots of different debates as to what amount you should have to, 2 months worth of expenses, 3 months worth of expenses, 12 months worth of expenses. In the crisis that we're in now, obviously, if you had, 3 to 6 months or even more would be great, but many people can't build it up. But I think the point is just adjusting the way that you start saving and building it in and making it part of your habit, not waking up at the last minute, because what I have found now is there are those people who procrastinated for years, and they are in a situation where they are struggling now to make ends meet and having to cut back in certain places, which I know we'll address at some point. And there's some obvious places for me. If you look at small ticket items, for example, just places that you can cut back and reallocate to start building up an emergency fund. You don't need to be buying every single thing out there. And I find these numbers build up a lot. I often sit with people, they say, but I saw a shirt on special it was normally 1,000 Rand, I bought it for 500 Rand. You buy enough of those and you spend enough of those small ticket items over the month, and before you know it, you've spent a few thousand Rand. Reallocate it, readdress your priorities, and start building up that emergency fund. We're obviously in the midst of a crisis right now, so most people are, in some places, have actually been forced to cut back because we're not going out as much. Now's the time to start if you haven't built up that emergency fund. Just reprioritize what is important to you in your life.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. In the pursuit of building up this emergency fund you refer to, where should your money go to first once your income has been reduced? So a person, many of my friends have had their salaries reduced by 20%, 50%, and of course we've got the cases where there's zero income coming in. But when a person's had their salary aberrated, even on a temporary basis, what would you pay first in terms of your expenses, and what would you cut first in terms of your expenses?
Okay. So I think it's very important to look at what has to be paid and what can be put on hold. So your debt is obviously the first place, which will be addressed a few times over this panel. But any debt that you've got needs to be paid. There are certain relief packages out there at the moment, but for the most part, your bank's not going to be happy if you don't pay. So you need to start paying off debt first. And you need to pay off debt that has the lowest interest rate first. If you've got a credit card debt, you've got debt in your house, which most people have.
The lowest interest rate first, or the highest interest rate first to pay your
The
debt?
lowest interest rate. So your bond, for example, you need to pay off your highest first. Or another way to look at this is to see if you can reallocate this debt. If you can go to your bank, for example, and see if you can pull all your debt into one place. There are facilities like this. If you're paying off a credit card debt, you've got an overdraft. These are very high interest rates. If you can reallocate that, put it into your bond, for example, you could cut your interest rate down from potentially 20% all the way down to 10, 11, 12%. Not always easy to do, but it's worth having that conversation with your bank. So I'd certainly touch the debt first, and then you need to really see what's important to you. I think this is a time where most people have realized that there's a lot that we don't actually need from a material point of view. It's nice to have a lot of things, but times will get better also. You don't need to buy that extra set of golf clubs right now, that extra dress that you've been looking for. Put those things on hold. So I think also prioritize over time periods. Have your medium, short, and long-term payments that need to be sorted out, and start with the debt repayments, build your way down, but just prioritize what's important at this time as well.
Right. So thank you for that, Neil. I want to come back to another question to you in a moment, but before I do, I just want to ask Steve to unmute himself. Neil, please stay unmuted as well. Just to address something that Neil spoke about, he mentioned debt and how best to pay off debt. But I wanted to ask you for a comment on how you view debt as well.
So firstly, again, thank you. Thanks for everybody for attending and for listening in, and I appreciate the time to share these thoughts. Debt is an enabler, but it's a crippler at the same time, is the way I view it. Obviously, long-term debt, purchasing a property, utilizing financing options to acquire a motor vehicle or something, anything that's substantial is obviously beneficial. And used correctly are enormously powerful tools, which again, I'm sure we're going to come back to in a moment. But short-term debt, things like credit card debt, things like stores, like an Edgar's account or a Woolies account, these things usually are the result of a lack of planning. Short-term debt is something that realistically can be planned for. Going back to Neil's point around this emergency fund, I draw a broad distinction with my clients. I always use the term. People say I want to put money away into savings, or I want to invest for my holiday in December. And I draw this distinction between savings and investments. Savings very much are those short-term measures. And as Neil correctly and appropriately said, they are things that one can and certainly should plan for. But it does come down to that point of discipline, the ability for people to actually say no to themselves. So when there's a sale, I always quote my father-in-law. My father-in-law has spent his working career in retail. And he always said to me that when there's a sale is essentially a wonderful concept for the store owner, because it creates the illusion that everything's on special. But in reality, it creates a scenario where the more you spend as the consumer, the more you save. You have to spend that money in order to benefit from that sale. And there's this hook that draws us all in, that something's on special. The truth is that if it wasn't part of your budget, and I'm sure we'll come back to this point of budgeting and planning accordingly a little bit later in the conversation. But if it wasn't part of your budget, don't get drawn into it. If it is not a necessity, it's something that can certainly be put off. And coupled with that is this evil ill of credit cards. I've often said to my clients, and I'm a family man with 3 kids and do a lot of self-drive holidays to places like Kruger Park and the coast and that. And we're always piling everything into the car and the trailer. And I've always likened a credit card to a trailer, in that the bigger it is, the more you're going to fill it. And for those of you who've packed for a holiday like that will know, and unfortunately for many people who have a bigger credit card balance, they spend, or credit card facility, they spend it as well. These things come down to planning, and it comes down, unfortunately, to that lack of discipline that comes with that. So I do view short-term debt as an evil. I view it as an ill, and I unfortunately view it as something that involves a lack of discipline, but something that can be worked around. Unfortunately, in the midst of a crisis like this, where many people's incomes have been somewhat impaired, short-term debt, if you've got the facility, certainly helps you get through a time like this. But always, and we'll come back to this point as well, we need to take cognizance of the consequences to these decisions, because putting more money onto a credit card in order to fill the grocery basket, or because there's a sale on one day only for something that is not a necessity, unfortunately is simply kicking the can down the road. And it is something that has to be paid back at a later stage.
Thank you.
So, Naki, if I can just add to that, just two rules that I've always lived by, and certainly have mentioned with many of my clients. The first is the 30-day rule that I work by. If there's an item that you don't absolutely need, that you think you want to buy, give it 30 days. Put the money away for 30 days. And if in those 30 days you haven't given much thought to that item, the chances are you probably don't need it. Then you've saved the money, you've got the money away. That's number one that I do. Another thing is, look at purchasing items by the hour rather than by the cost. What I mean by that is, if there's an item that costs 500 Rand that is on sale that you think is a good buy, and you earn 100 Rand an hour, that means it's going to cost you 5 hours of work to buy that item. If you think of it like that, that's more than half a day's work. Is it really worth putting half a day's work into that new dress or shirt that you may or may not need? It's just ways that I work just to cut back on spending unnecessarily, because those items add up by a lot at the end of every single month.
Cool. So I have a question for Steve, and then back to you, Neil. But Steve, I could ask you, I mean, you're the king of the great quips. You and Warren Buffett. May you have 1/10 of his wealth one day, please God. One of your clips, and if I could just ask you to Steve, speak a tad louder, please. You've got this lack of quip that you always say, a budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Give us a couple of
exactly
on that one.
So, it really is the point of departure that I use. Is, I mean, if I'm speaking directly into the microphone, is it a lot clearer?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's really that point of departure that I use with the clients and consumers that I consult with, that essentially comes down to that first step. Is it obviously comes down to understanding how your money is spent every month. It's part of that prioritization, and being the somewhat left-brained individual, highly analytical individual that I am, I'm a fan of spreadsheets. I mean, I like drawing up spreadsheets. I like using a spreadsheet for budgeting, and I like obviously encouraging people to do the same. For the simple reason is that a simple Excel-based spreadsheet can add up, as Neil referred to them, these small ticket items. Spending time and understanding your budget, your spending patterns, taking an evening every 2 or 3 weeks to download your statement from internet banking. Digital technology is there. It's easy for us to do. But to actually go through it and start looking at when you've got that one item that says miscellaneous and you've maybe budgeted 5,000 Rand for it, go through your spending pattern month after month and see exactly what your miscellaneous spending is. Because without managing, without monitoring, and without measuring, there is no budgeting process in place. These are things that don't happen naturally. And unfortunately, in a world and in an environment, in a society where most of us don't carry cash, we simply go to the store, we ring up whatever's in the basket, and we pay for it off a credit card or a debit card, whatever it may be. But there's no keeping track. Besides the SMS that the bank sends you and says this is how much is remaining in your account, that's not budgeting. Sitting there and saying I've got 5,000 Rand left to see me through the next week, as far as household expenditure is concerned, is not budgeting. You have to tell your money where to go. You have to sit there and find a way, and I'll chime in with this in a moment, but a way to tell your money where it's going to go. One of the things that we do, which has worked relatively successfully, And I say relatively because it's my wife, God bless her, who manages this process more than I do. But at the beginning of the month, again, using the benefits of convenience and technology, is we've got these voucher cards from Woolies and voucher cards from Pick and Pay. And that's where the majority of our shopping is done. And if we've budgeted, say, 10,000 Rand for the month between Woolies and Pick and Pay, we go to Pick and Pay and we add 5,000 Rand on the first or the second of the month into a Pick and Pay voucher card. And we do the same as far as Woolies is concerned. And that card is then the card that we use to spend. Firstly, it's a finite amount. It isn't a bottomless pit like a credit card could unfortunately be. And it basically also alleviates that money from available capital, that we're not sitting there with thinking, okay, well, I still have to spend 1,000 Rand a week on feeding my family. That's going to come from Pick and Pay, but I've spent that money because there was a sale item somewhere else. It's just using quirks and little things that creates a picture between the vouchers, between understanding how our money is spent, what our spending patterns are, measuring it, and then obviously managing it through the likes of these voucher cards. Just as an idea, as an aside for people to try. And as I say, for us, it's been a relatively successful strategy.
For those of us who are a day or two older than you, we refer to this as the envelope system. Hey, Pete and George.
Yeah.
In the days gone by, we would take envelopes. I remember when I was a youngster traveling and I didn't have a limitless budget, I would go take cash and put it in an envelope, and that envelope was specific to a specific expense, and that's how we ran it in those days. So, Neil, if I could ask you, I think last question for a while, but I just want to bring this one up. It's a dual question, actually, and it's about how to adjust your financial plans in the midst of the chaos. And my first question to you was about putting together an emergency fund. Okay, so now a person's faced with these problems. Okay, so I've just received a question over here, and it says, with a product like medical aid, life insurance, RAs, and similar, what percentage of income should be allocated with regards to income, especially when salary cuts have been affected? Now, that question I'm going to ask specifically to Chaim and yehuda. So, but keeping the fact that we're all coming under pressure with reduced income. My question to you is not about which of these to cut and how to cut and all that. yehuda and Chaim will get you in a moment. But Neil, my question is, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of, it's not like you're planning for 6 months in advance. You're planning for the now. You've just been told by your boss that you've got 25% less income coming in. You also don't know what's going to be the month afterwards. You don't know if in a month's time there's going to be decent income. So the question is, how do we plan for this in the middle of chaos? And coupled with that is, if there are assets that you can free up, which assets would you free up in this time?
Thanks, Nat. So I think a lot of what we've touched on does curtail into this. So while it is short term, I think it is important to firstly just take a step back. I think panic sets in at this time for most people because we're human beings and that's natural. But we're in the middle of this. The whole world is in the middle of this. We cannot control what's going on to the most part. Your finances, you've got a finite amount of what's coming in. There's very few people that just have limitless money coming in. I think it is important to look at your short, medium, and long-term goals at this time, even though we are worrying more about the short term. And again, making sure that your priorities are straight. So long-term goals, obviously depending on your age. If your long-term goal is to get to retirement, just remove that from your mind. Just let's simplify things. Remove what we can control now, and we'll worry about that later because things will come right. At some point they will. We don't know when, but at some point they will. Let's just whittle it down to what we can do right now. So if you are taking home 25% less than what you're earning, then it's a case, and it goes a lot to what Steve was saying. You need to look at your budget more closely. Hopefully you've been running it and you know what your numbers are, but you need to look at it more closely. I've done it myself over this period. There are very often many places that you can cut back. If you've looked at it and there's no place that you can cut back, then you need to look at a plan B if there's anywhere that you can potentially borrow money from. But most people that I've sat with over the last 2 or 3 months, there's been a fair amount of money that we can cut back on. And it might be making sacrifices. It might be canceling your satellite, which I did about a month ago. That's 1,000 Rand a month. The items will be different for every single person. You need to go through that, and you need to be quite harsh at this point and see what's important to spend. You're more than likely on your bond, for example, for those who still have bonds, have saved a bit of money. So they hopefully, whatever your your budget was, whatever your expenses were, that should have come down slightly just by being stuck at home. But the difference between those two, it's about just making sure that your priorities are straight and making some harsh decisions and cutting out any of those luxury items that you need for now, and you'll get them back. I don't think anyone's going to die by not having takeaways for the next 3 weeks, or buying that extra item of clothing, or going on to one day only. I've got a friend, for example, who he says he doesn't spend a lot. He every now and again he goes into one day only. Now I know that he goes into one day only a lot. So I said to him, why don't you just go and see how many items you've purchased on one day only over the last few years? It was about 3 or 4 years. He's purchased over 2,000 items on one day only. And you can imagine what that amounts to. And he's saying that he doesn't spend a lot. So I think people spend a lot more money than what they think they are. And this is the time to be real about yourselves and look at each line item and cut out where you can. Thank you.
Sounds like a basket case for Shopaholics Anonymous over there, our common friend. He needs a bit of help over there by the sounds of things. So Chaim, if you could unmute yourself, you're up. And I think the next two talks, Chaim and Yehuda, Chaim will be addressing risk, that your life cover, disability, severe illness, and the likes. And Yehuda is going to be addressing medical aid and short term. And these are, I think, in a certain sense, they're the low-hanging fruit. So they're the most obvious places to cut. But I think as Chaim and Yehuda address us, we're going to find that they might be the low-hanging fruit, but they're without doubt the more difficult to cut. Okay, like Neil said, cutting your DSTV 1,000 rands a month, that's one issue. But there's no punitive measure in so doing. There's no sport, so you're not exactly like you're missing out on much. Get Netflix for 160 rands a month, and you're done. But now let's focus on the ones that actually can affect you. So Chaim, I think the first question to ask you is, well, is it wise? I mean, you're tampering with your life cover. Chaim, you're my life broker. You do my personal life cover. You know how much life cover I have. And I think you probably also have a pretty good idea about how important that life cover is to me. So I think my first question to you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you as a client of yours. Chaim, is it wise to tamper with my life cover at this time?
So firstly, Nachi, thank you very much and good morning to everybody. The simple answer is no. We are currently living through a pandemic. We're living through difficult and challenging times. And we're also living through a scenario where you don't know that you're actually carrying the virus, and it could affect you from a health perspective. Some people actually don't survive, and the statistics are there. That's clear for everybody to see. So the short answer is no. Obviously, every single person in their personal capacity and within their own financial capabilities, are reassessing and looking at their financial position and their income, and obviously on a one-to-one basis, if there are difficulties financially with regards to meeting monthly premium obligations, then on a one-to-one personal basis, a person can look or reassess their current personal insurance portfolio. The risks involved with such a scenario is that when you bought your policy years ago, you were healthy. In the interim, things have cropped up from a health point of view. So if you decide to make adjustments, or heaven forbid, you need to lapse your policy and then reapply in a couple of months' time, the underwriters could come back with loadings or exclusions. So there is that risk, as the title risk attaches itself to that concept of risk. So again, it is on a personal one-to-one basis, but the short answer is, under current conditions, it's preferable not to tamper with your personal insurance portfolio.
Right. So I'm very keen actually to get you to ask Yehuda the exact same questions with regards to medical aid in the short term. But before I do, so there, Yehuda, just your first question, but give me 1 minute before you answer. So I'd like you to just answer the following question. A person is now faced with, they absolutely have to make cuts. It's no longer a choice issue. They've had their expenses cut by their income cut by 25%. And yehuda, whilst I'm asking Chaim, you can consider the same question for yourself. By 25%, 50%. It's not a discussion. They absolutely need to find a way of, at the very least, temporarily cutting back. So tell me, do the various life companies, the Discoveries, Liberties, Momentum, obviously Octagon, we deal with all these companies. So without going into the various distinctive offers that each one of these companies are offering, just as a more amorphous, generic kind of conversation, are the companies offering some kind of relief? And what is your opinion of the relief, just generically?
Okay. I might sound a bit cynical, and that's because over the years of dealing with underwriters and insurance companies, even though they sell different types of products, when it comes to what I've noticed in this scenario is that they seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet. And without specifying specific companies and the offerings that they do offer or the alternatives during this pandemic, the underlying theme or special offer that underwriters and insurance companies are offering their clients, besides, options of reducing your premiums, remember that when you play with an insurance policy, it's give and take, i.e. if you drop your premium, your benefits will drop. So the same mantra that they seem to be singing from the same song sheet is the fact that everything that they offer you over a specified period of time is free of underwriting. That's the specialness, i.e. if you make an adjustment to your policy, whatever that adjustment might be, in 3 or 6 months' time, depending which company your policy is with, if you want to go back to how things were before you made the adjustments, we will allow you to do that free of underwriting. And that is, to me personally, the central commonness that exists between all the companies. This concept of offering you, and that's the special offer. We offer you free underwriting if you, in X amount of time, want to readjust or go back to how your policy used to be before you made those adjustments. The nitty-gritties obviously would apply to the company that you have a policy with and what are those very specific offerings or relief that they do offer.
Chaim, I think that's a terrific answer. And I think if I could just say, we typically speak that if a person has annual expenses of 500,000 Rand, they would need in the region of 12 times that, roughly about 6 million Rand, 6 to 7.5 million Rands worth of cover and associated disability benefits. Sound about right, Chaim? And I think that in tough times, and you and I both have friends and colleagues, thank God not colleagues, but friends and clients who are going through really tough times now. And knowing that you can temporarily suspend your cover, but don't have to worry about the re-underwriting. As we get older, our health is not as good as it was yesterday. So I think it's something. I mean, let me ask you a question. And it's something that, you and I have obviously debated a long time. And as brokers, I wanted to tell the audience that there's been many a passionate debate in this office, passionate's an understatement over here, about whether the life companies and the medical aid companies and the short-term insurance companies are doing enough. And I think that the two current people, yehuda and Chaim, are without doubt those that have had the most articulated views. So I'd like to ask you, yehuda, on that. And you can have to answer both on medical aid and on short-term. Let's start with medical aid. So firstly, can I downgrade? I'm on, for example, Classic Comprehensive. That's a Discovery medical aid. If I needed to, could I downgrade now? And when my income comes right again, can I come back up again? So how does that work?
So you can only downgrade once a year, but there's also a catch with you can downgrade any time of the year. You can only upgrade one time a year, and that's in January. Typically the medical aids have what they call a window period, which is generally when they release the new products and the new fees, which is from September through to December. And during that time, you give notice to the insurance company that you're going to upgrade. Downgrade you can do any time of the year, right? So if you're on Classic Comprehensive, you can downgrade to Classic Saver, you can downgrade to Classic Core. But just remember, there's one catch. Every time you downgrade, especially with Discovery, there could be a clawback.
Right.
Now, remember that the Discovery's momentum included to a certain extent, and some of the other medical aids give you an advanced amount as medical savings.
Mm-hmm.
If you, in the June or July, downgrade from an executive plan to a plan that doesn't have savings on, you will have to pay back that savings, less the premium. There's a formula which I won't get into. So yes, you can downgrade, and there is a cost savings, but it does come with a clawback, and many people at this stage of the year, between June and July, are well into their savings. So it's also a way up of how much are you going to have to pay back in terms of a clawback to downgrade for premium saver, and does that help you for the end of the year?
Okay. So on that same token, if I could just ask you before we get to short term, it's a question that I've often been asked, and not being a medical aid advisor myself, I've never quite known the answer. So Discovery are definitely the kingpins in the industry. They're the dominant player, but there are other medical aids. I know at Octagon, we don't only sell Discovery. We sell Discovery, Medical, Momentum, and Fed Health, and Bonitas, and all these companies that I see. So if I found another medical aid that's cheaper, can I simply just swap to that other one? How does that work?
Very good question. No. If you're forced to swap, then a medical aid cannot.
Sorry, how would I be forced to swap?
You are retrenched, if you are fired, and if you move off a group scheme, etc. So that's what we call a forced swap. But a voluntary move, i.e., I have found a cheaper Bonitas policy, or I prefer their hospital plan to Momentum's hospital plan. If you go to Bonitas, they are allowed to, by law, impose waiting periods, impose exclusions up to 12 months on current medical conditions, and they could also relook at your medical history and impose late joiner penalties. So a voluntary move versus a forced move is also not always the best idea. So you might find it cheaper, but you might end up with a waiting period or exclusions that you don't currently have on your medical aid. If you are forced, i.e. being retrenched, then the medical aid can't do that to you. They have to take you on and not necessarily impose waiting periods.
Right. Thank you. So let me ask you on short-term insurance. Sorry, if I could just break for 1 second, a very brilliant question has actually come through over here. And we in the industry sometimes forget that we are so au fait with the terminology common to our industry that sometimes we forget to explain what is to us a common term, but is actually a foreign term. So the question came through. To be honest, I'm just trying to find it because there are a lot of questions here. What does free of underwriting mean? It goes back to a risk question that Chaim asked. So, Chaim, if I could just answer it, if I get it wrong, you'll just correct me, please, Chaim. But free of underwriting means if a special offer comes on. So every year, at least one of the life companies has a special offer. And what they're saying is that you do not have to have, for example, blood tests to prove that you're a smoker, non-smoker, do or don't have HIV, God forbid, etc., etc. And that's what free of underwriting means. It means that you don't have to go through the medical underwriting process, which is quite incredibly important to the granting or the non-granting of life cover. But to get back to yehuda on short term, sure. I mean, yehuda, you took over our short-term division, I think, about 4 years ago. You've done an unbelievable job of building this business. And at one stage, I took a look at your numbers and I said, why is it that the number of people that are being insured is rising, but your overall commission isn't? And you gave me an answer. You said what you've done is you've gone to all of your clients and seen what you can do to assist them in bringing down their premiums in anticipation, God forbid, not of a COVID. You obviously couldn't tell that COVID was coming, but anticipation of tough times. So the question I have to use is as follows. In tough times, what within my short-term insurance, my all risk and householders and householders, and I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. What can I do to reduce my short-term insurance? And I always think of the first case that I gave you was my father-in-law, who had been with, I can't remember who his underwriter was for, since he had gotten married 30-odd years, 40-odd years before then, and you saved him a huge amount on his premiums by just critically viewing it. So tell me, what would you think would be the things that people should be looking for or at in their short term to bring down premiums? Go ahead.
I mean, there are two ways to approach this. Depending on your finances, if you're in absolute crisis management, and you know, I have sat with clients who have had, you're talking now about 25% cut. I've sat with clients who've had 75% cut in salary, you know, and it's really a choice of what are they actually going to do with that 10 grand they have that month. So there are little things within the insurance, within a domestic policy, I'm referring just to domestic policies at the moment, that you can look at reducing without exposing yourself to too much risk. Your cars are not being driven, right, at the moment. If they aren't, for example, you can remove your cars from comprehensive cover to third-party fire and theft. That would bring down, just from the motor vehicle section, 25% of your premiums down. Just to distinguish comprehensive cover and third-party fire and theft means that a comprehensive cover, if you're in an accident, no matter whether you're right or wrong, your car will be fixed. Third-party fire and theft is whether you're right or wrong in the accident, your car will not be fixed, only the third party, and you're insured for fire and theft. So reducing motor vehicles to third-party fire and theft is one of the ways to do it. Taking a proper look at your insurance and your all-risk items, which is the most expensive. Those are the stuff that you can carry out the house. Many people have old cell phones on that, you know, they just haven't removed because their son is using it. Ask yourself, if that cell phone really gets stolen, is it worth 100 and 200 rand the premium is being paid for? Properly evaluate, and this is where you need to be very careful, properly evaluate your content cover. You know, there are thumb sucks. People are, I think I have 4 million rands worth of cover. You know, do a proper, forced a lot of clients to do a proper inventory, and we have found that they are way overinsured. You need to be careful here. There is a legal penalty if you're underinsured. It's not for this discussion, but reevaluating your content cover. A lot of people are way overinsured just because every year what happens, their content cover increases by inflation or by 10%, and they just let that roll over. And next thing you're sitting with 5-6 million rands worth of content cover, but when you look at it, you don't have that amount of worth of content cover in your house. And your fridges are actually 40 years old now. They're not worth the 30-40 grand that you originally had them at.
Thank you.
Just by critically looking at your policy, you can actually reduce it by a good 30-40%.
Right. Stephen, you wanted to say something on what you were saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think that as human beings, we're constantly torn between these concepts of fear and greed. And fear and greed, I think, sum up a large part of our role as advisors to you, our clients. Because from the likes of short-term insurance through medical aid, through long-term insurance and investments, the full spectrum, there's this constant battle that we're fighting as to, you know, to what extent do I need to insure myself? One of the questions that came up, we spoke about it a moment ago, how much life cover do I really need? You know, Yehuda's points on people not understanding the contents of and the clauses within their short-term insurance policies. But I want to bring in this point of what I refer to, and many do as well, as self-insurance. Insurance as a principle, I was always raised to believe within this industry. Insurance as a principle is something that you take out to cover yourself for the risks that you cannot afford to cover on your own. Exactly what you were just saying there now, Jay, is that if you've got the capacity to bear some of the risk yourself, there is an immediate cost saving at a time like this. And it comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier with regards to Neil's point on emergency fund or contingency fund. In many respects, an emergency fund is exactly that. It's an emergency fund. How you define emergency can be a number of ways. God forbid, what we're seeing in our community, in our society, and across the world at large at the moment is this loss of earnings emergency. But at the same time, the likes of self-insuring your motor vehicle and only for your own damages, for argument's sake, or taking a higher excess on your policy, all of these things have an immediate benefit to individuals on a monthly basis as far as their premium is concerned. And what always has concerned me has been the mantra from the insurance companies, whether they be short-term or life insurance and anything in the middle, that individuals must insure themselves to the nth degree. And I do fundamentally disagree with that. I think that in the early stages, if you have not built up your own assets on your own emergency fund and your own contingency fund or your own self-insurance fund, you are heavily reliant on insurance. But as your passage of life goes and as your financial planning process is, and this is the fundamentals of what financial planning is, in a way it is a methodology of weaning yourself off that reliance on insurance, because insurance, A, is a cost, and B, insurance is an exponentially increasing cost as time goes by. And if there's a way to balance that, I think it needs to be explored more and more and more, each one of us amongst your personal internal discussions and evaluations of your financial circumstances, and very much that between ourselves as advisors and yourselves as our clients, and not having this wrap yourself in cotton wool scenario of insurance, that everything is insured and the insurance company is going to take care of us. I think at a time like this, we're seeing that isn't the case in many respects.
Yeah, funny. In fact, we're getting to the point of the more controversial questions, and yehuda, the first one's going to go to you. But before we do that, Steve, the mantra I've always used with clients is that the objective of insurance, being it short-term insurance or life insurance, is not to enrich yourself.
Yes.
It's rather to replace what you have lost. And a lot of us, a late client of mine used to refer to it as a luller blanket. He always wanted to have a bit of a luller blanket in his insurance. And obviously, I think, that doesn't seem to be the way. But Steve, one more question. Chaim, one more question to you, and then over to yehuda for a more controversial side. And I think the rest of today is going to be, more emotionally charged. But so there are two questions here. The first question is, George wants to know, he's heard this term, underwriting at claim stage. Now, we've unfortunately had a lot of claims in our business. A lot of our clients have had life cover claims, disability claims, severe illness claims, many, many income replacement claims. And occasionally we have this dreaded term, underwriting at claim stage. So could you please describe the difference between underwriting at when you actually take out the life cover and underwriting at claim stage? What is the distinctive difference over there? And yehuda, I'm not sure if that applies to short-term as well, but if it does, you could answer that as well. Chaim?
So thank you, Nachi. In a nutshell, underwriting at application stage refers to the fact that the underwriters assess the policyholder, the prospective client, and when and if a claim is submitted, the underwriters have already taken on that risk, and therefore they will not re-underwrite or reassess the claim when a claim comes in. The second option is underwriting at claim stage, which is, in my opinion, slightly more onerous. It is a risk because what happens then is that when a claim comes in, the underwriters reserve the right to re-underwrite and reassess the claim to see if it fulfills or ticks all the boxes and requirements and criteria in order for a claim to be submitted. More often than not, it crops up with respect to some income protection claims with regards to the underwriters allowing this their discretion of having to underwrite a claim having to assess a claim when it comes in, as opposed to accepting it from day one.
Right. Okay, so a few weeks ago we had Dr. Abba Blumenthal on our panel, and Dr. Blumenthal spoke with great passion about what's happening in the country. I happen to be on a WhatsApp group that he runs. There's a few thousand of us. By the way, there are 5 WhatsApp groups, and collectively we're over 1,000 people. And we're speaking about the disappointments, Yehuda, that we've got specifically, and I'm sorry to put you on the hotspot here, but actually I'm not, sorry. I take that back. I'm not at all sorry to put you in the hotspot. But I'd like to hear your opinion on, have the short-term insurance players come to the table, and actually have they done their job? And I'm going to ask you a very specific question. One of my closest mates runs a group of high-end restaurants. So we're not talking about the Wimpies of this world. We're talking about more high-end restaurants. Obviously, you can imagine they've had no takeaways. People don't go to that kind of restaurant for a takeaway. Us kosher boys can't eat there, but we know the restaurants. But so these guys had zero turnover. In their insurance, they had that clause for, I think it's called business interruption. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But I think you know what I'm referring to. And I actually haven't asked him whether he has been paid out, but I've heard you, I was going to say moaning, but I think ranting is a more accurate term, about your disappointment with the short-term insurance companies, and how about their unwillingness to come to the party. And what I'm reading online, bearing in mind that my request for verifying information before quoting it, I'm going to go and break my own rule here. But I'm substantiated, but I'm seeing that the short-term insurance companies seem to be colluding and reneging on what we feel is their responsibility. What is your opinion on this? And you've got all the right in the world to rant. You've got 2 minutes.
I think our team has heard enough of my ranting, so I'll keep it brief. I think generally the insurance companies, both domestically and commercial, have fallen very short in terms of both premium waivers, premium discounts, and coming to the help of our clients. But that's a separate discussion. But keeping within that, I do not think that the insurance companies, there are far more things they could have done. Suggestions were given to them to help people who were really struggling to pay the premiums, and they weren't prepared to take on the risk, even though they had the reserves to take on the risk. But the most controversial issue has been what we call business interruption. So business interruption, very quickly, is that for whatever reason, and this is the technical issue, your business cannot continue. You insure yourself for a period. Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you hear me now? You insure yourself for a period of 6, 8, 12, 18 months, that your basic overheads are covered. That generally also includes the premium of the actual insurance company. And I need to be careful because we're not going to name and shame here, but many insurance companies refuse to pay out due to a pandemic. Landlords were the hardest hits. Many landlords who their source of actual business is owning buildings and getting income in, their leases had a clause that said, should there be a pandemic that prevents the landlord from the tenant from operating, they don't have to pay rent. When presented with this, the insurance companies then very quickly instituted their pandemic clause, which didn't exist prior to COVID-19, and didn't pay out business interruption. In the last month, 2 brave insurers have come forward and started paying restaurant hairdressers some overheads.
You comfortable to tell us who those are?
Sorry?
You comfortable to tell us?
Suntam has come to the table, and Momentum has come to the table that I've seen. Remember, I'm only speaking. I can only really verify the claims that I have on my desk.
Yeah, but you've got a big. You would know.
So I can't. I know what people read in the press, but I can only verify that what I know about personally.
Wow.
But generally, this is going to be a legacy that is left behind, as opposed to the rest of the world, where business interruption is what kept businesses going. South Africa was the exact opposite. There's companies that have explicitly excluded pandemics from now on going forward. And I think it's going to be left a very bad taste in a lot of business owners, especially landlords, with the insurances.
Yeah, it's tough. I think we're gonna talk about that. So let me ask you just last question for now, Yehuda. A lot of clients have asked me this question. You know, in my company, we had someone who either was tested positive for COVID-19 or we suspect perhaps they were. First question I wanted to ask you is, does an individual who is suspected to have COVID-19 obligated to tell their employer? You know, my question comes from the HIV, where your status you do not have to declare. So that's the first question. And the second question is, are the medical aids paying for these tests? What is the story over there? I know it's a bit of a long question, but just try to keep it to 1 minute, please.
I'll try to keep it very short. So first of all, from the 7th of May, COVID-19 has been classified as a PMB, a prescribed minimum benefits. However, it's also been given the status of HIV. So you cannot ask someone legally their status of COVID. However, because COVID does have an implication of being so infectious, you are, as a COVID positive person, forced to tell your employer. So in a scenario, let's just use our office, for example. If I, God forbid, know that I'm COVID positive, I can come to you and say to you, Menachem, I'm COVID positive. You do not then have the right to go to the rest of the staff and say, okay, we have a COVID positive case, i.e. yehuda Kay, we're shutting the office. The only thing you can do is say we have a staff member who has tested positive, and therefore we are instituting protocols of COVID. But where it differs to HIV, just very quickly, is I, as the COVID positive person, do not have the right to withhold that information from my employer.
Right, thank you very much. Go ahead.
No, I mean, you're going to ask, sorry, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Running out of time, we've only got a few moments left, and so I just want to, we've got through a hell of a lot, but I want to get through a couple more, and perhaps I could ask this question to Neil and Stephen. If one of you, I'm going to ask the question, put your hand up and answer it. I suppose we'll be first on the buzzer. Hey, guys, so get your hand on the buzzer, get ready. Neil, you might want to take, thank you very, very much. So here's a really tough question, and I got this question from a very close friend last night, who's also a very large client of mine. And I was debating about asking this question or not, but hey, you know, what's a bit of controversy? It makes it warmer in our hearts. So he says, I'm fast losing faith in South Africa. Now, this is a guy who, you know, I really believed he'd be the last bloke to turn the lights off in this country. I suppose just after me. And he's fast losing interest in this country. But unfortunately, what's accelerated his disenchantment with South Africa is that he and his wife have both been retrenched. They're going through, they took Neil's advice. They had the emergency funding. They're fast running out of it. You know, how long do you think it will last for? And they're now considering emigrating because they have help in another country. So, and his whole debate is that if he goes to this other country, he gets free schooling, basically free medical aid, social benefits. And he's saying, I'm a South African dying on the wool. His first language is Afrikaans. Where does he go? You know, he can go to this other country and he will be sponsored, so he'll be fine. But does he go? Or do we say, guys, we're in the midst of the storm. Now's not the time to go make life-altering decisions. The country will settle down. Employment will rise again. And indeed, there is a bit of a rainbow coming. Or are these dark clouds beginning to settle? So this is a tough question. I pose it to Steve and Neil, not because I just like them. You've been exonerated on this one. You don't have to answer just yet. So Steve, Neil, who's going for this one first? Steve, go for it.
I was going to say Janksy can take this one first, but that's the easy answer. Naki, I think that, you know, it is a question that certainly plagues every one of us. You know, regardless of the spectrum of on the one hand, not affected by this, please God, that's a situation that many of us can be in, or on, God forbid, the other side, that I'm totally affected, as per your example. And I think that you know, there are certainly a number of things that we that we need to be taking into account. And the first is, I regard South Africa as I have for a long time regarded it as an entrepreneurial paradise. We're a population of 59 million odd people with a potential marketplace of many millions. But our competitor base as businesses is relatively small, just on the basis of demographics and social history. So, while everybody is not an entrepreneur, and I understand that, and that's really the biggest challenge that I think people face, is that we're those who have a reliance on a fixed income or a reliance of a fixed job and a salary and stability that comes with that. Those jobs, unfortunately, at the moment are in short supply. But I do think that the one thing that South Africa does bring to the table is the power of the network. South Africa is a very network-heavy economy, a very network-heavy society, and I do believe that while it works both in favor of those who are looking to, or business owners who run their own businesses, as well as those people who are looking to please God, get back on their feet and explore opportunities. We're good people in that sense, and generally speaking, do open doors for one another. I don't believe that the grass is greener on the other side. I think that there's this particular warmth within South Africa that does open doors, particularly relevant or relative to other economies. But those pulls and those draw cards of the social support net, free healthcare or government-sponsored healthcare and free education at a decent quality. These are things that we don't have. And certainly those of us with the ability and the means to provide those privately for our clients, for our families, we tend to forget that there are difficulties for others, and those draw cards are huge. It's not an easy answer. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. I think that the long and the short of it is really to really look at South Africa with open eyes. I'm one of those diehards. Deeply patriotic, deeply in love with South Africa, deeply don't want to leave at all costs. But at the same time, there are opportunities on the other side, but there are also pitfalls on the other side. And I do firmly believe that while we've sat here using a great example that came up earlier with the sort of bordering on communism environment that we've experienced in South Africa over the last sort of 10, 12 weeks, ironically, it's not that much different anywhere else. So we were on a webinar just on Friday with an economist who's based out of Ireland. And there he is saying exactly the same thing coming out of the Irish government, that we forget that it isn't, these aren't uniquely South African problems. But I do think that the safety net, the sort of catch-all, while there are privatized expenses that come with it, I think that the network and as I say, that ability to explore that network is unparalleled in this country, and that's my personal view.
Fantastic. Guys, we've actually run out of time. I have a whole host of questions I really wanted to answer, but if I could just give, I think I threw Stephen and Neil a bit of a dirty ball there. So I'm going to perhaps give a more financial advice-driven question than that. To leaving a country is a deeply, deeply personal question. But I think the majority of the people that are sitting on this panel now, and the vast majority of our client base, have, for whatever reason, chosen to live in South Africa. And there's a lot of good to live in South Africa. Other than today, we have a terrific climate. It looks a bit like London outside now. Well, we have a terrific climate. We live in a beautiful country. We're a beautiful people. There's a lot of wonderful things about our country. But at the same time, and I think this is the key from a financial advice standpoint, that doesn't mean that we need to be as passionate about South Africa when it comes to where to invest our money. Because where we invest our money isn't driven by emotion, by sentiment, by passion. It's driven by logic, and it's driven by one objective measure. Which environment will I get the best long-term growth for my money? And the Octagon house view, and when I say the Octagon house view, I need to stress this isn't Menachem Kay's view. This is the considered view of the advisors on our panel and the other advisors that work with us together at Octagon. Depending on your age, and depending on your age and stage, I think stage is probably more important than age, it is advisable to have a decent portion of your funds directly offshore. At Octagon, we run 5 local unit trusts and we run 6 offshore funds, £3 and $3. I see Mr. Paneris getting a whiskey out. Okay, Paneris, enjoy your whiskey. So I think it's very important to understand that you need to keep money in this country because we live. We shop at Pick and Pay, not at Tesco. We buy our clothing at, I don't know, I was about to say Studderford's, that's a bad example, but we buy our clothes in this country. We don't buy our clothes at Macy's in New York City. So we need to keep money in this country to live. But a large portion of our wealth, we feel, should be invested overseas. And certainly if I take a look at my clients, those who have the luxury of liquid wealth, a good chunk of that, if not over 50% of that, sits overseas. Now, that isn't to say, I mean, Stephen beautifully put it, us being a very strong entrepreneurial country. We are. Peter and I were talking earlier on about how entrepreneurial we are as a culture in this country. But at the end of the day, there are wonderful opportunities for us to make money in this country. But if the objective of a financial advisor, a wealth manager, is to preserve and grow your wealth over time, a large chunk of that wealth needs to be overseas. And that might turn. I mean, I'm not giving a comment on South Africa. If Mr. Ramaphosa gets his way, and yehuda's comment on earlier on that obviously puts it into jeopardy, but if Mr. Ramaphosa gets his way and we become a more investment-friendly environment, there'll be wonderful opportunities to invest in this country. But your objective is to preserve your wealth, not to be swayed by the emotion, because that is where we make our mistakes. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to, it's now just before 10 past 11. We try to keep these from 10 to 11. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We've had a really wonderful crowd. And thank you for all those who posted questions on the chat group. But I also want to take a moment to thank the advisors at Octagon, all of whom put together some really, really cool questions. And those questions are the ones that were posed to them today. So thank you to the panel. To Neil, to Stephen, to Yehuda, and to Chaim for being on the panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions that you put forward. And we'll see you guys next Thursday. Please watch your emails and your WhatsApps for the next topic, which will be equally as exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, stay warm, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember, from a COVID-19 standpoint, if you do not have to do it, just don't. If you have to go to work, and you have to go shop, do what you got to do, spatial, keep your social distancing, wear your mask, wash your hands, etc., etc. But if you do not have to do an activity that involves other people, don't. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Have a good one.